The other kind of speculation that I wanted to talk about is in land. The same thing has happened with the collapse of the housing market, with the rise in the food prices, with the financial crisis. Two things have happened. There are food insecure countries, such as the Gulf states, South Korea, Japan. They depend nearly on 60% of their food needs are met through food imports. So when the food prices went up, they realized that they need to ensure their food security. So they have been going into very rich areas but poor countries buying up land. Say in Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan, Tanzania. You had countries like India who saw an opportunity to make money, that there is need for food, so they are going into, they're financing the corporations to go into countries like Ethiopia, buy up millions of hectares, actually lease millions of hectares of land to grow cereals for export. And then, of course, you have the private investors from Goldman Sachs to JP Morgan to others who are looking for opportunities to make money, and they realize agriculture is the other sector. So they have been leasing or contracting land or buying land in poor countries, predominantly in Africa, a trend which has come to be known as land grabs. Initially, there was a strong reaction from Food and Agriculture Organization, from IFAD, from the World Bank, expressing concern about its implications on food security for the poor and hungry in third world countries. And immediately, the development discourse took over, which is this is a great win-win situation because investors can make money, the food insecure countries can have access to food, and these poor countries who are cash-strapped can make some money. I mean, while they're at it, they might as well sell their mothers and sisters, right? Anyway, financial crisis was used by the World Bank. World Bank has gone in and told poor countries that you are in a financially strapped economy. You need to make yourself more open to investment reforms that will make you more attractive to foreign direct investment. So International Finance Corporation and MIGA, which is Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which are private sector arms of the World Bank, they have gone and advised and helped set up investment firms in Ethiopia, Ethiopia Business Forum, in Sierra Leone, and they are facilitating this takeover of lands. Why would you complain? Well, between 2006 and 2009, nearly 50 million hectares of land has been leased or purchased. Again, in poor countries, some of these deals, which are 99-year lease for 99 cents per acre per year, are unbelievable deals. They are available to a very select few. They're not available to the local small farmers who are struggling for a piece of land. They're struggling for access to resources such as water. They are happening in countries such as Ethiopia, where 13 million people depend on food aid. So try imagine trucks of food aid, full of USAID food aid, coming into Ethiopia, while there are trucks full of grains leaving Ethiopia while people starve. We put out a report called Misinvestment in Agriculture, which you can download from our website. It has a great foreword by Howard Buffett, who is son of Warren Buffett. I'm sure many of you are aware of who that is. He points out that I am the demographic that the countries are hoping to attract. Just a few months ago, Howard was offered an equity stake in a land deal that was being brokered by a hedge fund. He was told that the partners would receive cash upfront with no personal liability, that the host government will provide 70% of the financing. The host government will pay for all utilities. The 98-year lease required no payments for 4 years. The cost was $2.91 per acre per year after 4 years. Another fund provided a prospectus that promised returns of between 15 and 20%. Just recently, I've been looking at the prospectus of funds which are based in Europe and Singapore, US. They promise returns of 25-30%. The US agricultural land has averaged a return of about 6% over the past 30 years. So compare in the US, it's 6% returns vis-a-vis 25-30% returns that are being promised in Africa. So either these deals are really good for investors, or the managers of these funds are hoodwinking and lying to people. But as Howard says, if we didn't know better, it would sound like a great opportunity. I know many of you are thinking of running out to look for those hedge funds. But he says, here is what I'm sure of. These deals will make the rich richer and the poor poorer, creating clear winners who benefit while the losers are denied their livelihoods. And as I said, many of the hedge funds, Wall Street banks are involved in it. I was recently at an ag investors conference in Geneva, and it is just mind-blowing. You know, somebody talks about water, that, water is the next blue gold, and somebody raises the hand and say, how do I make money on it? I mean, literally, it's true. Somebody was like, can you tell me, how do I make profits? How do I make money off water? You talk about starvation, and they say, wow, food is a hot commodity. That's where I need to go invest in. Just to give you an example of Ethiopia, again, as I said, a massive lease project is on. Ethiopia Business Forum, which was created by the International Finance Corporation, is facilitating these deals. To give you the example, Karthuri Overseas Limited, which is a subsidiary of the world's largest rose exporter, Karthuri Global, out of India, it has bought close to 1 million hectares of land in areas such as Gambela, where the Anuak tribal community has been marginalized, which has seen massacres in a country where just before elections in May, 30,000 people were arrested just because they had a political opinion and were opposing. Edible oil manufacturer Ruchi Soya also has entered into a contract with the Ethiopian government. They have leases for 25 years. The next African country will come by and say, we give you a lease for 99 years. So it's a race to the bottom. People who say it's a win-win situation, if you look at the budget, 2010 budget of Ethiopia, this income is not reflected. It's not coming to the people of Ethiopia. So you have to question, where does this money go? And before I run out of time, I'll just say, it is true. You know, after the food crisis, people started saying, we need to invest in agriculture. It is interesting, World Bank and all are talking about investment in agriculture without saying that it is the policies of institutions such as the World Bank and IMF that are responsible in the first place for African countries not investing in agriculture. Structural adjustment programs were responsible for shrinking the government to a size, as they say in US, you can drown it in a bathtub. Small government. Don't interfere with agriculture. Let the market prevail. And then we talk about investment. So what kind of investment do we see? We see land investment without really looking at what kind of investment we do. So yes, it's true, Africa needs investment in agriculture. It needs investment in supporting small-scale farmers, as a UNDP or World Bank-supported reports say. It is about small-scale organic agriculture that can actually feed Africa. You have a continent where 90% of the population owns 1 to 5 acres of land. You don't put them on a treadmill of high input, expensive technology, which is controlled by IPRs, intellectual property rights, or you would have hunger and farmers in debt. It requires improved extension services. It requires education on conservation techniques. It requires investment for regional integration and to build local capacity. It definitely does not need policies which allow foreign investors to go back in and to grow and export food for their own people. Just at the conference that I was at in Geneva, there was a gentleman, I'm not going to go into the details, but from Lisbon, who said, you know, we Portuguese, we went and found India, we went and found America, we went and found Sierra Leone, and we gave them so much. And now we're going back to these countries and giving them again. I mean, the audacity of the colonizers to actually say that the colonized benefited from colonialism is, at least to me, I guess, because I come from a colonized country, astonishing. And lastly, World Bank, OECD, UNCTAD, they're all trying to come up with this code of conduct principles, you know, to put a sugar coating on a very bitter pill. You're taking away the sovereign right of people to have access and control over their own land. You're taking away the power of governments to be able to regulate and ensure the human right to food for all. But they come up with a code of conduct which donor countries, people sitting in Washington and Geneva have come up with no input from impacted communities or host governments. So when people say, well, what if we make it all win-win situation? I would say there's some very simple questions to ask. When local people lack land rights, they still demand land reform. Why should foreign interests and foreign businesses have precedence? What guarantees are in place to mitigate food insecurity risks for local population? What evidence is there to suggest that the land deals which will take place will be transparent when most of the land deals that have happened so far are shrouded in secrecy? At the Institute, we are doing documentation work in several African countries. You cannot find, it's impossible to see contracts. And when you find contracts, they're barely 3 paragraphs long. Why should we believe that the communities will be fully incorporated into the negotiation process when it might be in the interest of the investor or the government to exclude potential dissenters? How will best practices be replicated when there are almost no role models to follow? This whole land grabbing is not a new trend in some way. United States has had plantations in Latin America. It didn't create prosperous economies. It created banana republics. What type of enforcement will be established to ensure minimal environmental damage? What kind of quantifiable social benefits will the local communities derive? And what kind of consequences will investors and facilitating governments face if these benefits do not come to fruition? So these questions need to be answered before we go ahead with this whole land lease project for Africa. And we have to look at the history of mineral extraction. The history of mineral extraction, diamonds, gold, is a very sad, inhumane, cruel one in Africa. And when it comes to soil and water, which is the essence of life, it is even more precious. So the stakes are very high. And again, I urge you to get hold of our publications, because Howard puts it brilliantly in his foreword as he concludes and says, Africa is not a commodity. It must not be labeled open for business.